one of the clients was going through a session, and he's sort of like, when some people come out of the body-based breakthrough process, they come out like a bear coming out of hibernation. It's going, oh gosh, okay. They're sort of like orienting back to their environment. And one guy was like, where did you learn this? And I was like, I don't know. This is kind of something I Frankenstein together over a period of time here now. It's been over a decade at that time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I've just done this with 1,000+ leaders across different organizations and with people one-on-one.
Right.
And he looked at me, Alex, and this is actually the most shocking thing at the time, is he had like disgust in his face. And he was like, that's a damn shame.
Huh.
And I was like, okay, what?
Yeah. No, I thought I knew where this might be going, but I don't. Keep going.
He goes, that's a damn shame. And pause. And I think he was just trying to be dramatic. And he goes, there should be an army of people teaching this stuff with you guys because we need this. And there's only one of you.
Got it.
Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Green, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change.
All right. I am excited to be sitting down this afternoon with Matthew Cooke here in Boulder, Colorado. We're both in Boulder at our respective offices, but setting up for a good conversation here today. Let me just tell you a little bit about Matthew. Matthew is the founder of a somatic coaching program, a certification program called Body-Based Breakthrough. It's a business based here in Colorado, but serving students around the world, I think. We'll ask you about that.
Mm-hmm.
But Matthew is a very experienced executive coach, facilitator, a founder, and a leadership mentor with over 15 years of experience in the field. He did his undergraduate work in coaching and related work at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, which is cool because we've got the Scotty connection here we can talk about.
Yeah.
And he is a trauma-informed or trauma-certified practitioner in somatic experiencing, Kathy Kane's somatic work, which we'll talk about, Diane Poole-Heller's work with DARE and attachment, Irene Lyon, integrative attachment therapy, and organic intelligence, which is Steve Hoskinson's work with nervous system work. So very experienced, and to me, as sort of a fellow somanaut, to use Gil Headley's term, somebody. And I've gotten to know Matthew here in Boulder over the last year and just have recognized very much a fellow explorer, somebody wanting to know the intricacies of how we tick, how we work at the nervous system level, and how the nervous system connects to our well-being and our psycho-emotional health, our physical health. These are all things that Matthew has spent a lot of time thinking about and working with and learning about. So in terms of our conversation today, we'll hear a little bit about Matthew's unique story, and then topics I want to drill into. One area we talked about going into is kind of like why in a lot of Matthew's background has been in the tech space and startup work. He's been in a startup. We'll talk about that. There's still a lot of the coaching work that he does, business leaders. And one of our topics is just going to be what do they need to know about the nervous system? What do they know about the nervous system? Why could somatic work play a role there? So that's one area. And then we're going to just spend some time talking about somatic experiencing and related nervous system work, just kind of unpacking some of the principles, some of the ideas, some of the things that have revved us up and excited us as we've explored it over the years. I don't know. We'll probably talk about a few other things, but that's what's on the menu for today's conversation. Anyway, Matthew, happy to be sitting down.
Thanks,
with
Alex.
You. Welcome.
Thanks. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited just to chat about these things because I feel like you and I would talk about this stuff offline anyways.
Right.
So I'm just happy that it's fun to record too. Yeah.
Totally. 100%. Cool. Let's do sort of like the bio part of things first. Yeah. Just give us a version of, how you ended up in this field, probably some personal reasons, of course.
Yeah.
And then it's become the professional work you do. Yeah. Just sort of take us a little bit on that journey.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Out of university, I started working in tech. And that was a beautiful time in my life as everyone, like 23 years or 20, 21, 22, worked at a tech company. We were building the Netflix for optimal living, which is such a cool idea.
It is a cool idea. What's the name of the company?
It was called Entheos.
Okay.
So Theos, God, theology, the God within. And I was head of content curation. And so I got to work with 200 of the world thought leaders and everything from like neuroscience to productivity to conscious business, conscious parenting, mindfulness and spirituality, health and fitness, like kind of across the board.
Yeah.
It was kind of the coolest job on the planet because I got paid to learn.
How long were you there?
I ended up working with them for about 5 years.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, though, we were working 70-hour work weeks. It was. I worked 70-hour work weeks. I'll say that. And everyone else worked really hard too. But in doing that, unfortunately, at 24 years old, I kept getting these like dizzy, flu-like symptoms. It was like virtually every 2 weeks on Friday afternoon. And I would go home sick. And then Sunday afternoon would roll around and I would magically feel better. And then I would go work again. Go crush it. Go rock the week and things like that. We had the Thank God It's Monday was one of our things. Work cultures. And so at 24 years old, I was like, we were like practically like snorting Adderall. I mean, it was like, we were like super like high intensity about it because we were just so passionate about the work at the time. But it was this very Tony Robbins-y, which I love Tony Robbins. We were just chatting about that. Tony Robbins is incredible. And, like massive action, go do the thing. It's great. And my body had another story or had a sort of another plan. And so I eventually just fully burnt out after about 6 months of that, like back and forth. I kept getting sick every couple of weeks.
Yep.
And so I wanted to understand like why my body and mind were at war with one another, why they weren't working together.
Got it.
So basically since then, however math works, 12, 13, 14 years, something like that, I've gotten myself like basically a PhD in trauma healing and burnout recovery, just of my own personal experience, reading like hundreds of articles, academic journals, studies, and getting like real trained up in this stuff. Thank you so much for that really generous bio. It just literally reading all the things. But yeah, I feel like I've gotten really lucky and who I've gotten to study with. Similar to you, it's like we've gotten to learn from some of these incredible masters of this field later in their lives. And so I feel grateful that we're getting to have this stuff passed down.
Yeah.
But yeah, I realized, Alex, this is funny. I realized it was in yoga classes and on really long walks that I felt like I got my best ideas. That was actually like the first like thing, like the first click. It was like, oh, I'm getting like good, like my thinking is more clear. And that's when I felt sort of most connected to myself while having, I have less anxiety. I feel more confident and less overwhelmed. And so it was just like I was starting to kind of piece together sort of the felt sense a little bit. But it was interesting when I was in these yoga classes, eventually, and this was the sort of genesis of body-based breakthrough or B3, I just started bringing a journal with me. And I found that, the yoga teachers and myself being one of them will say things like, and just let your thoughts pass like clouds, which is lovely. And there's always a time and a place for that. But I was like, no, these are my best thoughts. I want to keep these when I have these thoughts. I don't think like this the rest of the day. Normally, I'm just so overwhelmed and anxious. So I want to capture this. So I actually just started writing down my thoughts when I was in yoga classes. And I'd have teachers that were like, are you auditing my class? No, this is about me. Don't worry about it. And that was really it. And so I created this really like simple journaling and movement system. And I just began like showing it to friends, just sharing it for free, obviously. And like with a couple of clients who I thought might be receptive to sort of this weird woo stuff. Because at the time I was a high performance coach, as you can probably imagine. So let's optimize and let's high perform. And so it's so fun to talk about this stuff. I just realized it because I don't talk about it very often. But I found very quickly that people were having less anxiety and like even imposter syndrome and some of these things, like they were like really uncovering the truth of who they were on some level. And so it felt like we could predictably and reliably have these experiences for people, and really using this sort of science-based process to really link up and have the mind and body be in relationship. We sort of now joke with body-based breakthrough that it's like going on a date with your body.
I like that.
Hey, what's going on? Let's talk. What's up? So fast forward to 2021. This is just thinking from like a bio perspective. Fast forward to 2021, I was working with about 8 senior leaders at a large tech company in Santa Monica. And one of the clients was going through a session, and he's sort of like, when some people come out of the body-based breakthrough process, they come out like a bear coming out of hibernation. It's going, oh gosh, okay. They're sort of like orienting back to their environment. And one guy was like, where did you learn this? And I was like, I don't know. This is kind of something I Frankenstein together over a period of time here now. It's been over a decade at that time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I've just done this with 1,000+ leaders across different organizations and with people one-on-one.
Right.
And he looked at me, Alex, and this is actually the most shocking thing at the time, is he had like disgust in his face. And he was like, that's a damn shame.
Huh.
And I was like, okay, what?
Yeah. No, I thought I knew where this might be going, but I don't. Keep going.
He goes, that's a damn shame. And pause. And I think he was just trying to be dramatic. And he goes, there should be an army of people teaching this stuff with you guys, because we need this. And there's only one of you.
Got it.
And so I think he was being a little tongue in cheek. But at first I was like, what are you talking about? But that was all I needed to hear, because that was in 2021. And so that was all I needed. So I thought, what if I could take my understanding of sort of like high performance coaching and that sort of industry, and then this trauma informed body based like background that I was starting to pick up. And what if I could simplify, streamline, systematize the entire somatic coaching process as I was seeing it, which is exactly what I did. And we called it body-based breakthrough, or B3. And then later that year, we had our first cohort. 6 folks came through, and it was so lovely. And so as I've continued to grow that business, it's been lovely. But I think what I feel more inspired about, and I think even the spirit of this conversation in some ways, is that I just can't stop learning about the body and about our biology and like how it responds to the environment and the people around it. It's just so cool.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I love that. Let's stay on B3 for a bit, because like to me, and I've never heard that exactly that
like backstory.
Yeah, that backstory. So now you've got me curious. Yeah. Tell me, and I guess our audience, let's include them too. Yeah. What are some of the building blocks, principles, axioms, like what, as you first Frankenstein and then later refined, what has this, tell us just a little bit about the process.
Yeah. So essentially we're now training and certifying coaches and therapists and, mental health professionals or wellness professionals. But the process very broadly is we're looking to slow down, spend some time away from technology, ideally for about 20, 30 minutes. But it's cool because it's a practice that I first found on the yoga mat by myself, just kind of, and then eventually it became me just kind of like rolling around on the ground first thing in the morning for 15 minutes.
So a clear movement component, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So essentially it's a combination of movement, simple movement, journaling, breath work, and coaching. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
in that order, or it could be any order?
No, there is a specific formula, that we run through. And doing it. We're starting essentially with, we're here for somatic experience. Let's talk about it. We start with orientation.
Yep.
And we end with orientation. So basically my ability to sort of experience the environment around me, notice even what's kind of pleasant to look at in the environment, what, my ears take in, all of these things, but so that I can spend some time on the outside with the idea that the environment there aren't any immediate threats.
Right.
And then it allows me to go so much deeper inside. Again, this is all from just like my own personal experience. So I don't know if it works for everybody. That's what the science would tell me, but it seems like for most folks that by checking out the outside, going inside is a little bit easier.
Right.
So then we do a couple breaths, and these are all very cooling breaths. Most people that come in to do this work with me, are we'd call hyper aroused. So it's just, they're just more anxious as I am. So that's probably why I'm attracting those folks. And so, so we're using a gentle, soothing, settling kind of breath, like a 4-4 breath or a 4-8 or like a box breath. Although sometimes holding the breath for some folks can even create stuff. So just tracking the breath a little bit. And then we come up with a headline. It's just like, what's the thing today? The thing I want to look at. And sometimes it's as simple as just literally, what should I do today? What's the plan? What do we want to do today? And sometimes it's what's the next step in my career? Or how do I get my health back on track? Or how do I repair with my partner? Because we just got into a fight last night or something, I'm making that up. Yeah. And so that's what I kind of come in with. That's my headline. And that's why we call it a headline, because it's not like a paragraph in a newspaper. It's it's just what's the headline. Yep. And then do another breath or something. And then we'll come up with the desired experience. The desired experience. So it's, if this is currently in some level, I feel some confusion or unclarity, or I'd like to unpack this headline a little bit more. In an ideal world, assuming that everything worked out perfectly, what would I be experiencing? Joy, clarity, peace, trust, power, connection. Whatever those. Yeah. And the cool part is it's always associated with whatever the headline is. So it's always a little different, and that's what makes it kind of fun. And then we move and we breathe, and there's some cool stuff in there throughout the process. But as we're moving and breathing, what happens is, and you and I could totally geek out on this forever, is this concept of coupling dynamics. There's these these disparate parts of the brain where memories and thoughts, and even in the body, that things are stored. Sometimes just by giving them some space to sort of bake, suddenly these thoughts just boop, they just click. And so it's kind of like people talk about like shower thoughts or eureka thoughts. Yeah. And it's really fun, Alex, because, and I don't know if you find this as a practitioner, but sometimes people just think I'm like a wizard. And I'm like, actually, that's just your biology doing that. I'll take 5% credit, but mostly that's just your body doing a cool thing that it's made to do.
Yeah.
And so it's really beautiful. And then at the very end, we do a process where we call deep rest, which is just incredibly integrative for the brain, especially the default mode network of the brain. And then we come out of that and we come up with an inspired action. And that's why I think organizations like working with us, because
there's an action.
But it is kind of nice because, I look at it as, I don't think we're doing anybody any, especially in the somatics world. Sometimes it's like we're hesitant to put actions on things because we don't know what's going to emerge.
Right.
But I also kind of look at it as, I don't know that we're going to do any harm, because somebody just spent 20, 30, sometimes upwards of 90 minutes with their body. The answers that come, I always encourage, it's a baby action. It's not go write that book. It's write the intro paragraph or send that email, write that text. Yeah. Could even be take a nap. And I usually will prompt that too, that it's like, hey, listen, we don't need to move mountains with this, but it's just, what's the inspired action? I'll just share, there's this cool have you ever heard of the inspiration horizon? This is cool. And It's like science that just makes sense. Okay. So we have 24 to 48 hours to take action on inspiration.
Okay.
And if you think about it, you get a good idea on Sunday and you don't take action, it's like Wednesday.
Yep.
That's a cool idea. I'll get around to it. I will do it. But then, it just kind of fades out. And sometimes we still do take action. But if I get an idea on Sunday night, Monday morning, and I start taking even the tiniest amount of action, there's this ball of momentum that just starts rolling down the hill. So anyway, so I love that idea. And that's what I always encourage people is go take that inspired action and go put it in your calendar for the next 24 to 48 hours. And again, it could be taking a nap or getting a massage. Yeah. Anyways, that's body-based breakthrough. And then we orient again. Yeah. And then people are like, whoa, I'm coming back to earth. It's kind of wild. Yeah. Because they spend so much time.
I love that because I hear both there's more than what I'm about to say, but I hear both the nuance of what happens when we include body awareness, breath awareness, exteroceptive awareness, through orienting. So I hear all those somatic principles, but I also really love the really clear process, So super cool.
Thanks.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, and what I've found, I think what our goal with the business is to ultimately be a stopgap for folks that go, I really want to become trauma informed. I want to understand the science. I want to get how to start to go into the body with my clients.
Yeah.
but I don't know that I'm ready to do 3 years of training with somatic experiencing or something like that. And so I would rather that if the choice is no training or 3 years, like there's got to be a middle ground. So that's our goal, is in those 3 months, we teach you, it's a formula. It's like a very specific way that you can go in and get out, like from beginning to end with a client, and that they can feel very confident. And actually, almost more importantly, that as a practitioner, you can feel confident going inside and sharing this with the client.
Yeah.
And then my goal is by 2035, we want to be like the biggest referrer to somatic experiencing. I want to refer everybody that comes through our program to like go take somatic experiencing, because I want us to be the beginning. Yeah. That people can just start to learn these.
Do you know your count so far? Because I have referred a lot of, I have a pretty good, I'm just going to share. I'm going to share this briefly. One thing I'm proud of is that, because like I've done a lot of trainings, right? And I've sought out quite a few, full length programs, structural integration, Feldenkrais work, somatic work, IFS, whatever. Yep. So like a lot of full length programs, lots of them are multi-year, like SC, it's a 3-year program. And then, pretty often I'm in a position where somebody's newer to the field. And so I'm, mentoring, and they're just informally chatting about things. And so I'm often sort of saying, hearing what their situation is, and here's what I know, and here's a program I liked, and this and that.
Yeah.
And for me personally, like I can't really, I don't really have a course of learning that I've done where I would just snip it out. I don't need it. But, there is a little bit of a sort of, I don't know, certain things rise to the surface. And what I usually say is that the one program, like I wouldn't let go of any of my training, but the one that I would most unreservedly sort of recommend, the one that I would have the least hesitation to say, I don't think you'll have a bad experience, is the somatic experiencing training. Now, what I always hedge things a little bit, I say, listen, depending on what your goals are, you do not, if you do not necessarily have to do the 3-year program and become an SCP, depending on what I know lots of people who have done the first year of training and now they weave it into something, or the first, and it's structured in a way. The first year is pretty general. The second year gets really specific about categories of trauma. The third year is about sort of taking a deeper dive with certain things. Yeah. But anyway, so I'm always a little bit like, you can get started.
Yes.
And especially if you already have a context, you're a coach or you're a therapist or something else, a yoga teacher, you're going to be putting to use. And I say, so you don't think about the whole 3-year thing. Just even that first module is going to be like, you're not going to think you wasted your time or your money. This is usually my little pitch. Yeah. And I haven't literally kept track, but I got to tell you, I think that the conversation I've just had, that I just paraphrased, I'm certain that I have had that conversation with at least 15 to 20 people who have then taken SE, and I don't think any of them have got off the wagon, and nor do any of them sort of think to themselves that this was not. And what I always say is that, okay, there's going to be professional applications. Of course there are. At the raw level of just, you're going to learn some things about yourself that I don't think you would have learned another way. I mean, maybe, if you did sensory motor psychotherapy training or, something close enough. But it's special. Yeah. Anyway, special. I'm going on a tangent here, but I don't even remember.
It's great. Yeah, we're gonna have a playful rivalry around that. Who we can refer to.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, keep track. So you'll probably beat me in the numbers game, but I'm doing my part with with all these one-on-one conversations. Yeah.
I feel like that we do. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too moralistic about it, but I feel a real duty to share this with as many people as will listen. As clients, but as practitioners.
Yeah,
because the more and more that this gets shared, the more and more people get healed. Steve Hoskinson always used to say, I don't know if he still says it, but he said something like, they're making trauma faster than we can heal it. Oh, but it's just kind of funny to think of it almost like like widgets, like they're producing trauma quicker than we can heal it. And that's
very funny. Yeah.
So I just think about that. It's, we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, totally.
To help more and more folks.
Super cool. For you regular listeners to the podcast, you know that about half of these episodes focus on TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises. And I wanted to make sure that you know about the Redbeard TRE certification program, our educational platform to certify others. And we have both an online version of that I teach, as well as an in-person version of the training that my colleague Ellen McKenzie teaches in Madison, Wisconsin. My next online certification training is beginning August 3rd and 4th, 2024. That's the first of 3 modules. And the way the certification program works is it's about a 10 to 12 month program divided into 3 phases of learning, each with a weekend connected to it, and then some one-on-one work with me and people on my team to support your learning journey. TRE has been a life-changing modality for myself. It's open to people with any background. I wanted to make sure you know about the program. You can find more information at redbeardtre.com. Where should we go next? Yeah, that's the mission and the vision for B3. Super cool.
B3.
Yeah.
But I think for the purposes of Redbeard, I mean, I could nerd out about SE with you. We can go down that rabbit hole even more.
Yeah, totally. I think, so here's the rabbit hole I want to go down is, so you've kind of alluded to this phase of sort of Frankensteining, reading a lot of things, articles, books, practicing stuff, yoga, you have a very significant yoga background. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what you're not gonna be able to share all the key moments, but what were certain things that were like an aha for you, or somebody's work came on your radar, or you first learned the term, ventral vagal nervous system, or so, just the little moments in your self-learning that you look back on and you say, oh yeah, that's when I really recognized X, the biological nature of this or whatever. Just a few of those would be, I think, cool to hear about from you.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful invitation, Alex. Thank you. I mean, what's initially coming to my mind is 300 things. But I'll say that when I had a therapist at one point. I first started out, and I remember going, that's like this, like just you're trying so many different people, trying to find the right fit. And I found Irene Lyon's community. And Irene Lyon does really beautiful stuff with Smart Body, Smart Mind. Yeah, that's what it's called, right? Is it Smart Mind, Smart Body?
I forget, but yeah.
It's one of those. And she had a Facebook group, and I posted in there, does anybody know a male? Like I really want to work with like a great male, like wanting the sort of masculine presence to help me sort of work through some of the trauma stuff. And everybody recommended, I had probably 14 people recommended this gentleman named Mark Reed Smith, who now lives in New Zealand, but actually he'll be moving back very shortly back to the United States. And so I found Mark about 5 years ago, and so wild. I don't know if you've ever found this, Alex, but it feels like there's something kind of divine about it too. I don't know if we want to get spiritual, but
we can.
About 6 months, I started working with him about 6 months before my wife and I got divorced. Mm. And I had no idea that we were going to be divorced. So it was like this really just like gorgeously set up by the universe, by God, that we would meet and I would have somebody who had built safety, trust, connection with. And I think that's the real gift that we get to give our clients is ideally a real safety, like landing pad. Right. And so he was that for me. And so I couldn't be more grateful to have found him at the time that I did.
Mm-hmm. And he's an SE.
He's an therapist. SEP. Yeah. He's actually moving towards the faculty track for that. So like really I think it's all he does is eat, breathe, sleeps SE as well. So he would be fun to have.
A little SSP in there.
Yes. And he does SSP. Yes, totally. Yeah. The SSP and the RRP, or is it R? You know the names better.
It's the RRP.
RRP. They like their double.
I'm still learning that one. Yeah.
So he was just such an instrumental person. And specifically for me, that was just really big. Also reading Peter Levine's books are just, oh my goodness. Like every single time I remember I'd had to really titrate it when I first started with his books. I could only read 2 or 3 pages at a time.
Same thing.
And I'd just be in tears or just in freeze or something.
That is the weirdest thing about trauma books in general is how much you have to titrate it. Like as soon as you read about these concepts, then they just come alive in your own experience and body and memory. And yeah, it's really interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, we could speak about that. I mean, I've found that so interesting in my beginning and intermediate year with Arielle Giaretto, but I'm sure in many SE trainings, she would say that just by us putting the words to these like very ancient structures in the brains, it's like in the brain, it's waking those things up on an unconscious level, on a body level. And so if you have things that are sitting there hanging out as we talk about fight for an entire afternoon, as we talk about flight for an entire afternoon, as we talk about freeze for an entire day, you will be probably feeling some of those things and experiencing. And so I just remember going on the breaks and just being like, don't talk to me. Totally. Not literally, but that kind of, because it's kind of wild. Yeah, this trauma stuff is just like a beautiful unpacking, unfolding of who we are. So it's this idea of subtract. What is that whole like Lao Tzu? Do you know this? The Lao Tzu quote is mastery is actually subtraction, not addition, something to that effect.
Okay.
It's mastery comes through taking away, not through adding.
Yeah. Nice.
Anyways.
Yeah, well, so that's a good direction to go. Maybe I'll offer a few reflections too. But as you think back to your the SE training process. And I alluded earlier to how, you're going to learn some things that are cool to work with others, but you're going to almost for sure learn some interesting things about yourself and how you work. I mean, to me, that's one of sort of the big opportunities of going through the training. Yeah, like maybe we could both reflect a little bit. What was meaningful for you to look at? And you had already done SE work with Mark, I think, before you began.
Yeah.
Right. So the model wasn't brand new, but now you're in a learning environment. Totally. So I don't know, for you, maybe it could be things you learned with Mark or in the training, but what have been some of the self-learning that's emerged as you dove into the SE model?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like just about everyone that I've met that I've talked to about this, it feels really relevant and real for them. And it was certainly for me, was all of the thawing out. I was so functionally frozen, especially having like sort of grown up inside of tech. It's sort of this like grit your teeth and just get through it kind of thing.
Yep.
And it's on the other side, I'll rest, but then there's another sprint. And so there's never the natural rise and then settling of the system. It's just, and so I think it was recognizing how frozen I was, and then coming out of it, and then to feel the anger that was there and the deep sadness and grief and the really big emotions around that it's still obviously it's always a work in progress, and you and I have done work together, and I just am continuously humbled by this work. Yeah, I'm kind of curious for you. Yeah, what are some of the big ones for you?
I'm trying to rewind my memory tapes here a little bit because I'm trying to remember what my initial. I'm going to share a quick story about leading into SE because it was really on a whim. I didn't have an SE therapist first. I was living in Madison, Wisconsin at this time. Yeah. I don't think there were any SCPs. There might have been one or two. Yeah, there were one or two, but not that I knew. But later, when I looked up in the directory, there was like one person or two. Yeah. But so it was not yet big. But for me, the pathway was, I had been doing structural integration bodywork for full time, and which had been that was my entry point into for me, like my own somatic opening wasn't really through yoga or something like that. Like for me, it was through body work, and both as a receiver and then as a doer. So that was like a early phase of my therapeutic work. But one thing had led to another, and I had gotten really interested in TRE. That's the neurogenic tremoring sort of practice. And the reason that had hooked me in is because I had a really significant and sort of life-altering random discharge trembling thing that had happened like before I ever even trained in bodywork when I first went through the Rolfing 10 series. So I'd had this big discharge, but was that a demon? Well, like I didn't have any vocabulary around nervous system or anything. And the bodyworker didn't know anything either. And then when I became a practitioner, I would see that pretty often, that somebody would either have a big or anywhere on a spectrum of, what I would think of as a discharge, some release of energy. But again, I had very little framework for understanding what it was about. And so for me, the big hit when somebody showed me TRE was like, it was pretty much exactly duplicating the thing that had happened to me and that I would see sometimes. And so that was like, whoa. And that then opened up my whole, that was my first entry point into the autonomic nervous system. I call it the neurobiological revolution of the last 20 years, from, I think Peter was one of the earliest sort of thought leaders in this, but then, Bessel van der Kolk jumped in and others, Bob Scare and Dr. Berselli and Pat Ogden, and of course, Stephen Porges, the polyvagal guy. And so that I had been looking prior to this time period, I had been looking at body mind stuff from a pretty deep Eastern perspective, because I had been doing Zen training and I still really value that Eastern perspective, but it was like something woke up in me, which was like my inner science geek. And I had been earlier in my life, I was going to study science, but then I don't know, I kind of drifted from it. I went into philosophy and then all this other stuff. And so this inner science geek woke up that was like, wow, like we know there's all these like things that we know about what's happening in the underlying nervous system, not just like the way I guess I used to think of, okay, so sure, we digest some things, we mount an immune response. Okay, cool. Right. But somehow tying our biology into how is it that we respond to stress? What are our stress tendencies? What happens if something really stressful or traumatic has happened? Right. How does that still stay with us? And once that lens was opened up to me, I just started seeing it everywhere in my clients and then also in me, that lens of how is my body reflecting how I relate to stress as both present and past. Right. And I was like, nothing in my structural integration training had really looked at that. Certainly not from a scientific perspective. So anyway, so for me, and after I was sort of doing TRE, I was like hungry for more of this. And so I got Peter's books, and I remember reading those too in a titrated way, and they were so impactful because, again, it's sort of speaking to all these things. So anyway, so I show up this training in St. Paul, Minnesota. I just register. I'm going to go do a module 1. And I went in, Abby Blakesley, who you're going to see later this afternoon. You should say hi for me. Anyway, so I show up into this training hall, mostly psychotherapists, couple body workers, whatever. I'm coming in as a body worker. And, I think it was that first module was 4 days or 3 days. I can't remember. Anyway. And the thing that had been frustrating to me about Peter's books, In an Unspoken Voice and Waking the Tiger, those are kind of the two main ones that I think of, was that like the theory made perfect sense or like really resonated with me about the processes, and there were great case examples. But what felt super missing to me, and maybe they're in there, and if I looked at them now, I would see it. But my impression at the time was, this seems really compelling, and I have no idea how the actual therapy model works.
Oh, yeah. No, it doesn't.
It was like, okay, this stuff makes sense. Biology, animals, fight, flight, freeze. And I'm hearing these sort of really interesting outcomes through the case studies. But I'm like trying to picture like, what are the mechanics of the system? So I don't know. So anyway, so I showed up at the training because I like, probably if I do this, and I wasn't thinking I would do the whole thing. And
because you hadn't had a therapist.
No, so. I just was like, I want to see how this works. And so in module 1, I started to see how it works, and I was totally enamored. But anyway, so that's sort of like the preview version. But to me, over those first 2 years, some things that stand out to me is what you said about how if you're spending a whole day talking about fight or flight or freeze, or you're talking about falls or things like that, somehow by kind of going through the inventory of experiences, it really helped me appreciate how, what I had thought of as not particularly significant events. But when I slowed down with them, I realized how much was there, how much was very much there in my body. And Bob Scare, who's a psychiatrist. Do you know Bob Scare?
I don't know his work very
He was
well.
based here. He was based here in Boulder, but he passed away a couple years ago.
Okay.
He's got a great quote he's got a cool book called The Trauma Spectrum. And he also has another cool book called The Body Remembers. And
that's Bob Scare?
Yeah, that's Bob Scare.
Very cool.
And a quote I don't know the quote, but a thing that he says that I really is he says that, it's the collection of life. He's the guy who really sort of invented the term little t trauma and big T trauma, by the way.
Wow.
Sort of this concept.
Then I know Bob Scare.
Yeah. So this quote that he has is, it's the accumulation of life's little t traumas. This is a paraphrase, not a direct quote, that add up to the personality. Again, this is maybe a little bit of a simplification, but that was basically the gist of it.
Yeah.
Was like, there's all these little influences that you might not think of having been all that significant, but at the level of the developmental sequencing in your body and your brain, and there's a good chance that has deeply shaped who you are today, how you are in social connection, the things you gravitate towards, the people, the activities, the hobbies, the things you avoid. There's a chance that these are sort of shaped by these kinds of experiences. And what I found in SE training was that experientially, I recognized how true that was. And for myself. Yeah. And so there's this little bit of the kind of like a somewhat spacious. I always appreciate this. It wasn't overwhelming and it was spacious. It was just, train session by session that I did with my peers or that I did, when in my personal work in between. It was just like session by session. It was like something would arise, a little memory. And if the time was given to not just talk about the narrative thing, this thing happened and I got scared or whatever, but to sit with it, just how much more there was to do than just remember it. And there were a few things that were like pretty key for me to resolve. Again, like one example was sort of minor, but one time when I was, 10 or 12 or something, some kids, we were playing around in a playground, and then some older kids who were kind of like hooligans stole our bikes. Okay. Now, normally I sort of think back on that. Okay, it was a little scary, whatever. I was this or that. But when I sort of processed that at a nervous system level, I just realized how much was there, how much freeze had been there because in the moment, sort of froze and was scared. And then after, and these are the kinds of things that are just, wasn't all that well attended to at the time. And I don't think of it as having been the deepest influence in my life. But then when you stop and you slow down with it and you do go through, process that, then coming out the other side, somehow you've got more energy available to you, more of yourself. So there was lots of little things, like not always sort of episodic in that way, not always memory based, but I just felt all these layers surfacing and working. So so
well articulated.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I remember.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, just such a beautiful way to share about that. And I felt like I was right there with you. But you're right, though, like in the renegotiation of what happened or what didn't get to happen, there ends up being this like butterfly effect in some kind of weird way where it frees up life force energy, but it almost feels like all of a sudden all of those memories that maybe like throughout the time from then until now that were sort of stacked up, just kind of poof. And then I can move forward in a more meaningful way in the ways that I couldn't at that time.
I think the other thing, I love that butterfly effect comment because it's totally true. Yeah. The other thing I think happens every time you do that is you have a little bit of a glimpse as to, for me anyway, there's a certain sort of a confidence emerges, which is, sometimes I get really stressed out about something or something doesn't go well or something didn't go well in the past. Yeah. And if I just, under the right conditions and if I sort of trust the process and I sit with it, like there's this feeling of, wow, I actually have a tremendous capacity for resilience and moving through and not just stuffing down or not just numbing out. And you do that a few times and then suddenly it's, wow, that becomes like a superpower that like you have a very different way of moving through something. So I love that piece of it too.
Yeah, the strength that we get to see in ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that with you so many times in the work that we've done together. It's like I will leave a session and go like, holy crap, I have so much more available to me now that just didn't even seem possible. I was actually just sharing that with a client the other day, and she was like, that's really useful that when we are in these more sympathetically charged, activated moments, thinking becomes very black and white. And that it's just very binary. It's like ones and zeros. But then when more of our cortex is available and online, suddenly it's like the full rainbow technicolor. There's 40,000 options here that all of a sudden it feels like life is more possible.
Yeah.
And then just easier because I just pick the easy choice or, of these 40,000, there's just a lot more options that make it more pleasant, easier. Something like that. There's more agency.
Yeah. Nice.
I get excited about that. Yeah. For myself, but for my clients. I think what's also interesting about SE or just the somatic work in general, I went to my first module for organic intelligence, which we briefly chatted about. And I remember talking to one of the women and just in my naivete, her name's Robin, and I'm struggling to remember. I think it was Robin Crane. Do you know Robin Crane?
No.
Maybe? I think it was Robin. And I was like, so what are the techniques? Kind of a little bit like what you were saying. Okay, like what's the mechanism? How do I fix people? 24-year-old, 25-year-old Matthew was asking.
Right.
And she was like, well, it's kind of cool because the longer you do this, it becomes more just kind of like a way of being.
Like which sounds like such bullshit.
It sounds like total
on the
bullshit.
surface, which sounds like such bullshit. Which is my first thought is like for me, if I was 24, I'd be like, wow, what a shitty answer.
No, that was kind of how it felt. Yeah. It's like, what does that even mean? Yeah, no, but it's because
but now I know what that means.
Because it becomes this all-pervasive way in which you approach life.
Yeah.
And so it's not something I'm doing to a person. It's a way, because I think some therapy can come across as this like something that we're doing to someone.
Oh, yeah, there's lots of therapies that have a protocol, of course. Yeah.
That are, I'm doing this thing at you. Rather than this sort of relational way of just existing together and feeling this organic rhythmicity of the system, which I love. Steve Hoskinson says that the organic rhythmicity of the system, the pendulation, and just to support people's systems to do the thing that they just naturally want to do and that we want to naturally do, and that just feels good.
Yep.
That gets me excited. I'm like, that's why I do this work.
Totally.
I just want to keep doing that thing. I want to keep riding that wave.
Let's talk about Steve for a second, because I learned a lot from Steve through indirectly. And Twig, but but because I had to miss one module or maybe two modules. I can't remember. No, maybe it was just one. I think it was just one module. And so I did it by video, and Steve was the person. Steve. And I've never had this. I mean, it was a decent number of hours of video, but I've done that before in other situations. I literally feel like I know Steve, even though I've never met him. Just from this one weekend of watching these videos, something like I actually really felt like I learned a lot of his particular flavor and style just through that one exposure. But anyway, my stereotype of Steve, or my caricature of his sessions, is that if we just watched a session, like is somebody an outsider? Wow, so those two people just sat there and chit chatted for 45 minutes.
Chatted. Yeah,
just chatted. But to me, that's the sort of something I appreciate so much about Steve is like how unintervention-y it is.
Yes. He actually calls it the free association conversation.
Right.
Yeah, we're just kind of shooting the shit for an hour. Okay, thanks so much. We'll see you next week.
Exactly. But it's what he's tracking and perceiving, and in a nonverbal way, highlighting and joining, and therefore amplifying, and therefore it's in the spaciousness of that kind of conversation, and then allowing for the organic rhythmicity, or letting the organic rhythmicity unfold. Yes, right there. And so often when somebody's organic rhythmicity is happening, whether we're a therapist or not, but especially for a therapist, there's lots of times when we are interrupting somebody's organic rhythmicity, or if we're talking to a friend. And something a little bit, we think of something else, or maybe unconsciously, I don't know, we don't want to go there. We steer the conversation somewhere else.
Right.
So there's actually something really profound about how he's structured that work.
No, totally. I mean, I think about Alan Shore's work in development, and he talks about how the caregiver with the child is mirroring, matching, and marking. And that is very much so what Steve does in that work. Is I'm going to mirror your, generally I'm going to match the energy of it, and especially
right.
And for a newborn, for an infant, it's actually also to mark it. You are happy, so it's like also setting in that's
right. Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And that is something that Steve really does. And I'll have the humility to assume he does know that. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't know that he's doing that, but it's cool that he's absolutely matching the way that an infant and a parent, a caregiver,
how that is meant to unfold.
Yeah. And that can be repaired even at 98 years old.
Yep.
I think that's what's so cool is all this work, because we're working with implicit memory.
Yeah.
And tell me if this is just totally off the rails, but I'm enjoying the geeking part of it. It's all in the body. Like the body lives outside of time and space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it is so wild that we get to recover and bring back as Peter says, the innate goodness and wholeness that we have by repairing these things that happened 20, 30, 50, 70 years ago in some cases. Yeah. It's just so wild.
No, and his phrase that, trauma is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence.
Yeah.
That sort of phrasing. No, to me, I think everything like my appreciation for SE and related work is it all boils down to that it's created in me like this just enormous optimism that I wouldn't have had otherwise, because at a certain period of time, I felt really weighted by, probably this is sort of through my work, people will often go through, compassion fatigue and, sort of really spending time with suffering, other people's especially. And so there was a time when that felt very heavy to me, when there was a certain powerlessness to it. What is there to do in the face of, these kinds of things? And don't get me wrong, and I'm not like trying to, suffering is still a major thing to contend with on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. But the huge optimism that emerged for me was that at least some of our suffering, that to the extent that there is a huge amount of that suffering is going to be a major influence on our world, that the capacity for resilience, not like in a superficial sense, the capacity for healing and changing and accessing something even after 20, 30, 40, 60 years. Once you see that happening, once you see that is the case, it's the opposite of the powerlessness. It's just this, it's just, wow, you don't have to give up hope. If there's safety now, then can we let that in, and can we let that into the biology and the brain and see what happens? Mm-hmm. So anyway.
And then we get to do it together.
Exactly.
I think that's like just bringing in the DARE stuff, the dynamic attachment repatterning experience thing. Diane Pull-Heller.
I flub it every time.
It's just like the longest. It's great. But the attachment stuff, it's just, man, that we get to do that stuff together. Ariel this is Ariel Giretto's story. She would share that she was contracted in her 20s to go to this, and I'm going to totally flub this up, but she went to sub-Saharan Africa to work with this. There was a tribe there, and they were going to learn something about the nervous system or something to that effect. I don't remember exactly all the context, but she went over there, and the gentleman that brought her over there, and it's so wild, his Jeep flipped or something, and he passed away, literally as she boarded the plane. So she came, and they were having the funeral.
He had just died.
Yeah. He had just died.
Yeah. And
so they actually flew in his family, his mother, he was from Britain, and they flew in his mother and his father, and it was a tribe, and they grieved with the family. They just bead in the wailing and the tearing up. And I think we all know like sort of the stereotype of Britain is it's a little bit more close-lipped and
staid,
and we're not going to do this. The women, I guess, slept in the same bed as the mom and just held her all night. And they just cried and cried together for a couple weeks. And that this was just like the most transformational thing for this family, because then they then brought this back to Britain. And I guess they then shared it with their family and other. So there was just this like gorgeous ripple effect that was able to be created through people sitting with other people suffering.
Yeah.
And I just love that example because it's such a evocative story of that these women literally, they would sit around the campfire and dance and cry all night, I guess, together. And there was always somebody sort of tending to this fire and in the grieving process. And so almost that the mom didn't have to carry all the grief herself.
Absolutely.
Is that like they could carry it with her and like literally dance it with her, the dance of grief. So did not expect to tell that story, but that is
no, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of, do you know Pete Walker?
The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. He's written a lot about complex trauma and developmental trauma.
Okay.
The Tao of Feeling Fully is a good one.
Ooh.
He's got one called, I think it's just called Complex PTSD. That might literally be the title of the book.
CPTSD, yeah.
But in his foreword, it's a little bit similar. He was talking about, I don't know where he's from. I think the United States. And he talks a lot about, in his books in general, he talks a lot about what we would call, implicit memory, but he frames it quite, his terminology as an emotional flashback. As opposed to sort of like an explicit memory flashback, more of an implicit memory, and not only the body piece, but the sort of the emotional tone. It's the whole thing of, you haven't been to see your family for a long time. And then you go back and, for the first 12 hours, you're in your adult consciousness. And then you don't even know why, but somehow something, just things start to shift and nobody has done anything. Nobody said anything to consciously say, trigger you. And yet you're now experiencing all these sort of emotional things. That happens to me for sure. Anyway,
same. Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't know if you can escape it.
An emotional flashback where anyway, but he tells a great story, which was he was visiting, I think, somewhere in India and was just about to fly home and there was a big earthquake or something like that. Oh, wow. And so he was in a hotel in a big city, maybe Delhi or something like that. Mm-hmm. But this might have been Bangladesh. And at first, and it was bad for lots of reasons. One, he couldn't fly home. It was like going to fly the next day. He was pretty young, I think. So pretty scary situation. But the thing he writes about that he was most scared about was that after a few days of sort of staying holed up in his hotel, he finally sort of came to this realization that he was going to need to go outside. And he was terrified because he had never been around sort of abject suffering. People had been killed and there was rubble and there was, he'd never been in that environment. He hadn't been in a war. So he'd never been in that sort of kind of space. And so but for some reason he had to go out. I think he needed to get food or something. Uh-huh. And anyway, so he was just like, wow, what, can I take this? Can I bear witness to this? Right. Yeah. And then what he writes about very movingly is that he had a really profound experience, which was that as much as, yes, he was bearing witness to suffering, what he was really impacted by was he was watching the way, and I'm going to tear up as I share this, but he was watching the way that people cared for one another. What he was really struck by was, the human spirit that had emerged and just how people were caring for one another. And he realized that if this had been a situation, back in his hometown, it would not have been that way. That how people, I mean, there might, maybe some of it, we hear these stories with, there's that human instinct, I think, is here all the time, but he saw it at a level that was just culturally innate, sort of like what you're sharing about in this grieving process you described. And he was so moved by it, and he realized that the culture he had grown up in was so disconnected from those basic levels of human caring. And so then he just realized, one way or another, he needed to figure out how can the Western person reclaim, those sort of parts of himself. Anyway, just, another sort of, in a way, a similar story.
Yeah. Of how we come together and
how we can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a really profound one. I mean, it is. It's just so beautiful. That's what I'm just so immensely grateful for this work. I mean, it's like selfishly that we get to heal as we heal other people. And also that like other people get to feel seen and heard and understood. And yeah. I don't know if this feels like the right pivot here, Alex, but I know that we've talked about this a little bit too, is your work with IFS. And I guess I'm just kind of curious as we're sort of like spitballing a little bit around like the ways that we support other people's systems and get to work with people. I'm curious how like you maybe see SE or somatic experiencing and sort of these somatic things, how they sort of dovetail maybe with IFS.
Yeah, totally. I'll give you this. Yeah. I mean, I think they dovetail a lot. For me, what it was, how I ended up bringing an IFS lens, and like now I consider it one of my like really core modalities, like SE is like right here with me. IFS is now kind of right here with me. And
I like that they're right at your chest, actually.
Yeah, they're right here. Yeah. They're right here with me. But I'll tell you this, I'd heard a little bit about IFS, but but it was really through Vanessa, my wife. She'd done a lot of IFS work. And then she started doing some training. This was early in the pandemic. And at first I thought to myself, as I heard about the process, I said, okay, I feel like I'm kind of working that way already, like with somatic experiencing with CybAM, which is where just for our, I know you know it, but for our audience for purposes, CybAM, it's sort of the idea that like if there's a sensation, then there might also be a memory or an image that goes with that. There may be a feeling state or an affect or an emotional tone. It's what are all earlier you're talking about coupling. It's how are these things all kind of woven into our experience, so to speak. And so I kind of thought to myself that like when I did somatic processing with people, like there was something intuitive about the parts model, but I also didn't really think to myself that I necessarily needed some training in that because I don't know, I felt like I was doing pretty good work, and I stand by that even now.
I was saying, I'm sure you were doing really
no. So no part of me thinks that like I don't think that SE is incomplete, and so you need to do this. But for one reason or another, it was really actually talking with Vanessa, and so she shared a little bit about. And I just thought, okay, I'm appreciating there's a certain structure that's coming in. Okay, we can sort of set this aside, and then also this relational piece where this part can talk with this part. Right. And so I started to see how there was an organizing principle that that was a little different and was new. And so I thought maybe having an organizing principle would be nice. And, anyway, one thing led to another, and I ended up doing the training. And what I am now using that model quite a bit, and the way that I hold it now, and there's a lot of parallels. It's like in IFS work, a key principle is they call it self, capital S self, or self energy. And in DARE work, it'd be very similar to sort of secure attachment. And in SE work, it'd be very similar to resource or to, ventral vagal safety physiology. There's all these crossovers, but there was the thing about the IFS model that I think has been most impactful in the way that I work is the idea that once we discern a layer of ourselves or a part, as we would call it in IFS, it's the idea that we can sort of just literally be in not just know about it, not just feel it, not just talk about it, not just sort of see how it's showing up in the body, but we can also, in a sense, literally be in a relationship. We can ask that part of ourselves, to tell more of the story. And it often will. We can reassure that part of ourselves. We can bargain a little bit. Hey, instead of getting, a level 9 of anxiousness when I'm going to give that public talk, hey, let's work together a little bit. Maybe like it's in both of our interests or maybe I can help you not get quite so anxious next time. So there's this relational piece that I have found very impactful. But nowadays, sometimes usually when it's left to me and I'm beginning with a new client, I almost always start with SC. I do a lot of skill building, language, shared language, nervous system work, getting to know their rhythms, their organic rhythmicity, hopefully.
Yeah.
So I'm learning about them at that level. And where I would bring in the parts work is if there's some aspect of their personality or their history that they're just wanting to explore in a really specific way. And then I think the framing of that gives a good scaffolding. So that's one thing, but the opposite is true too. So I have a fair amount of people who will come to me and they've done some IFS work, but they're curious about can it be more somatic? And, so that's what I usually explain is that even though, maybe we're working with parts and we're sort of following a little bit the format that we often would do with IFS, to me, my SC lens is never leaving, because as we're talking with the part, there's what's happening at the nervous system level. Just like in SC, I'm frequently taking pauses with a part. We always use the comment that, our sort of speaking brain or our thinking brain moves faster than our autonomic nervous system. So a key principle in SC is slowing down. So it's not just a cognitive insight, or thought, but that the rest of us is sort of coming with it. And I find that is really important to do in IFS work as well, as sort of how to stay with something and not only do the dialoguing piece, but then also now what's the change at the nervous system level.
That's gorgeous.
So to me, they fit together really smoothly.
Yeah. I mean, as you're saying, and I mean, maybe this is just different words, same thought. So I'm almost imagining like you could take a part and just basically Cybam it.
Yeah.
Can you not is there an image as you think about, you and I were doing some work and there was I had this character from a Marvel show when I was a kid that was in my belly. So there's image. I mean, there's certainly sensation, right? There can be emotion. I don't know how that's just coupling for me. That's just clicking, but that they do. It sounds like they really do land really nicely together.
No, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. And it's something that I think connects really well. This is actually something I learned a lot from one of Steve's students. I can't remember his name. I did my final year my final advanced 2 in, I think I told you this, I went to Northern Ireland because the training had filled up and I was mad and I wasn't going to wait. So I was like, screw you. I'm going to see what else is out there. And,
go to Northern Ireland. Yeah.
But there was a cool guy whose name I forget who had studied a lot with Steve Hoskinson, the Organic Intelligence founder. And for those of you listening, Steve was a longtime somatic experiencing faculty.
Senior faculty for plus years or something.
Yeah, a long time. He worked very closely with Peter. And then, then he created Organic Intelligence because, he kind of cultivated a pretty distinct style. But anyway, so something that I learned at that training was, even though this had been taught, but it was but what really landed for me was this idea that if we first, Steve sometimes uses blue and red as the framing, and I hadn't really, because Steve wasn't my primary teacher, that hadn't been the language we used. We talked about resource and activation, vortex, counter vortex, that sort of thing. A little bit more technical, like blue and red to me is so simple. Yeah. But anyway, this idea that, look, if you spend the time harvesting and attending to the blue, meaning the safety physiology or the resource pleasure, and not just enough to then go on and do something else, but if you can really gather that there's no wasted time by really building up this big ball of blue. That's sort of how I think about it.
Yes. I'm thinking of islands of safety. Never mind. I was going to say islands of blue, but no. Islands of safety.
That's a little bit how I think about it, because the idea is that when there is enough blue, then almost organically part of the organic rhythmicity is that pockets of red, activation energy will naturally come into the scene. But because there's so much blue, things are slowed down. It's not overwhelming. Resolution is possible. And so that idea and that's very key in somatic experiencing, is you don't just sit down with a person, say, hi, how are you doing, this and that, and then, okay, tell me what's hard for you or what's been really difficult. Because if you do that, you're not in their safety physiology. And even if somebody's sort of in their safety physiology, if you can really take the time to get to, and this is oftentimes over multiple sessions, get to know them and their nervous system to the point where it almost becomes habitual, that when you and I sit down together, or you and your clients or me, that what gets grooved over time is that, oh, this is the place where my nervous system settles. This is the place where safety physiology can come forward. And yeah, we end up sort of doing some work, but it's sort of easy. But there's a real crossover to that idea with IFS, because in IFS, the concept of self-energy is that if we can access they would call it self-energy, I might call it safety physiology sometimes. But if we can access that and then operate from that place, so now we're talking about our part that criticizes us, or our part that gets anxious, or our part that's really wounded from a childhood experience. But if we have sort of self-energy with us, we have everything we need to effectively work with those more challenged parts. And I think that's just a direct match with how we work with SE, that we use a little bit different terminology, but the principle is the same. So that's why, to me, I think they pair really beautifully.
They really do.
Yeah.
I love Steve. Steve has this motto that he says is, the job is enjoyment. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it.
Sounds very Stevie. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. No, he's a cool guy. Yeah. So here's something I'm curious about for you, Matthew. Like what, sort of looking ahead a little bit. As you've learned a lot, you've studied a lot. Your B3 has a lot of traction. You've got a clear why on sort of what you're doing with B3, and I think a pretty clear why on, you love doing the one-on-one work as well as a rich environment. But yeah, what do you, as you sort of go ahead, like what are you interested in studying or doing, or, what do you see when you look ahead a little bit?
Oh, as you were talking about IFS, that sounds really fun. I was thinking, I wonder if I can get in the lottery for that. I know they just transitioned to where it's coaches, whatever, it's something different now. Alex, if I was just to really share what's on my heart, I want to build an institute, like a physical brick and mortar institute and I've had visions of, tech executives, but all kinds of people stepping out of an Uber and them rolling their, suitcase up to the steps. And I just kind of come out with my hands out, out, and they just collapse in my arms. And I'm like, we gotcha.
Nice.
We're here for you.
Yeah.
And that people could come in. I'm thinking a little bit like Kripalu or Omega or Esalen or those type of, right? But that there would be like this sort of hub here in Boulder. And it's kind of wild to me that we don't have this here in Boulder yet.
Totally wild. Yeah.
There was the Integral Center at some point and all of these different things, but that's what I crave. And I have multiple conversations out with folks about how do we build this institute? So and I haven't shared that with you. So I don't think that I have. So that there would be
maybe
a place,
like a slice of it, but no, I'm catching the fuller view. Yeah.
Yeah. So there, so people could come and take daily, weekly community classes that are available to everyone in the community, and that we would have training programs, and that you would be able to share Feldenkrais with people, and that they would just a really rich environment for wellness, and that people could come for full scale healing. For whatever that means for them.
No, it feels like a complete no-brainer for this area, because it is a funny thing because, when I moved here, I thought to myself, I've only been here 3 years. It's, wow, I am moving to the epicenter. I think of Boulder. I still think of Boulder. That nothing's changed, but I think of Boulder as sort of like the world capital of somatic work. The Rolf Institute is here. The SE, Somatic Experiencing Institute is here. Lots of, if something is
neuroaffective touch, there's even craniosacral stuff. There's some of the headquarters of some of the largest wellness companies are here.
Has a massive, exactly.
Gaia
is
or
here.
Gaiam, they're here.
Yeah, totally. Wild. Exactly. No, so, but not only the company headquarters, but certainly at the level of practitioners, trainings coming through here. Boulder literally to me is is the epicenter. But I've always thought that, sure, you take a training at a hotel, but there's no Kripalu, there's no Omega Institute. What's that what's that one out in near San Francisco? I've been to it once.
1440 Multiversity.
1440 Multiversity.
Incredible. That's one that I think of.
Cool place. And, and so to me, Front Range, Colorado, Boulder area would be, the closest I think would be going to California,
Right.
So, wow, what a cool vision.
That's the thing, man. I think the more and more I'm going to get, is like the more and more that we have these artificial intelligence and some of these things that speed up our minds, I think that there's going to be just as much of a desire for the analog and for the truest biological experience.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to be a greater and greater desire for people.
I think you're right. Sort of like the equivalent of the slow foods movement, but for slow humans.
Slow humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
You heard it here first.
I never thought about it. I never thought about this, but Steve must be really congratulating himself for the organic intelligence naming, because now as we enter, as a indistinction, personally, I'm not like an AI. I'm not against AI. I think I follow AI pretty closely and I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
And as AI starts to do a lot of, what humans previously devoted a lot of their brain power or physical activity to,
this is what I thought.
Then what are we going to do? I think we're going to be, I'm hoping that then we can really sort of step into our humanness more, creativity, but also, our biology. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Steve cornering the organic intelligence, that was like a kind of a smart move.
It was smart.
In 100 years, maybe organic intelligence will be rare. Most of the intelligence might be artificial.
And thanks for naming that, Alex, because I don't want to be a Luddite. That's not interesting. And for some folks that is interesting, but I don't need to go off grid, go into the woods, build some commune somewhere. That's really cool. There's like a version of me that wants to do that. Right. But what I'm more interested in is actually like, how do we work with artificial and organic intelligence, and how do we bring those two things together?
Yeah.
In a way that the system goes, yeah. Totally. That's what's interesting to me. Yeah. What about you? Oh, one last thing, actually.
Wait. Yeah. Go ahead.
Is 2035. We want to have trained 1 million body-based breakthrough practitioners.
Okay.
I just want, by 2035, Alex, I want it to just be silly to not be trauma informed. That people are like, wait, you're not trauma informed? And not that people are shaming other people, but there's just, oh, wow, I would just assume that you would have been. Because it just becomes, it's just that prevalent, it's that pervasive. That to be a practitioner in any way supporting other people, that I want to be at the forefront of that as we continue to pioneer into the world of what trauma informed looks like.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Especially in 2025 and moving forward.
Yeah. So I love that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Can I return that question? Can I volley that back to you as we sort of wrap up here?
What's the question? Yeah.
Yes. What is the future of Alex? What's the forward momentum? What's calling you into the future? Whether it's with Red Beard or otherwise, or family and whatever.
All of those things come to mind. I think here's the things that I'm thinking about. One is sort of an educational direction. And I've shared this with you, but it's a little bit like, I was sharing earlier in this conversation about how, organically I had these release processes. For me, it was through body work and the neurogenic tremoring. And then I would see it and it wasn't all that well understood. And that's something I'm wanting to do a lot of education around, and also cross-fertilization. That's maybe a better word, because I still believe, I think of TRE as, it's like a little bit in a silo. I feel like kind of what you're sharing of, it's silly that people aren't trauma-informed. I think it's silly that we don't understand that when that our body might release stress through tremoring or other kinds of
and we see it as a process.
It's a metabolic process. To me, it's silly that when pregnant women, when they give birth and then they're shaking afterwards, that they're medicated.
Yeah. Or held down, even worse.
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah, exactly. So to me, that's pretty silly. Yeah. Something that I have already begun with Siv, my collaborator in Norway, is what we're really trying to do is bring this more out there. And again, kind of stepping out of the sort of little bit of the silo of, TRE. And because we've always said, why aren't more people coming to us? these are conversations with the founder, Dr. Purcelli, and they were like, all right, we got to find better ways of going to them. So for me, my background in body work, so one of my big audiences is I want to be connecting with other body workers and saying, hey, listen, there's this thing you could easily learn about, super important, and a lot of opportunity for facilitation. And and we want to educate other people too, doctors and whomsoever. So anyway, so that's one of the sort of things I'm doing right now. But the theme of education in general, and through Redbeard also, so I sort of feel inspired to just sort of create different sort of courses. Some of them could be workshops. A lot of it, I think a lot could be online learning at this stage, but just educating, even in the way that you and I are sort of trying to bring to light certain sort of concepts. You're talking about the shower moments. Oh my God, I have so many. My shower moments are like, okay, I need to teach dads about, because I have, we've got our 2-year-old, dads need to know about, nervous system for their kids, or they need to know about the attachment system more than they do right now. So my shower thoughts are around how to translate things that I've learned from somatic work into things that are applicable. So that's another direction that I'm working on. Yeah.
I'm really excited to do this all with you, Alex.
Yeah.
Separately, alongside each other, together. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, super cool. All right. Did we leave anything on the table?
I think we did the thing. We did the thing.
Okay, we did.
I think that okay. So if I was to give a wrappy-uppy thought, I really, it feels like my life's work is this idea of consistency over intensity.
Okay.
Consistency, like Matthew's personal work. And I think that other people might take that on as something that they want to bring into their lives too. But if we're thinking about nervous system health and living a life that is awesome, for lack of a better word, it's just how can I bring consistent, as Steve would say, non-habit forming, non-addictive, simple pleasure into my life rather than trying to do intensity. I had a personal trainer when I was in my early 20s, and he was like, dude, I'd much rather you're in here for 30 minutes every day and you don't even break a sweat than you come in on Saturday for 4 hours and you're doing, stair sprints and you tear your hamstring because you're just going all out. And that metaphor has stuck with me now for well over a decade. And I think about that all the time because, the world is a really intense place. And so if I can be a beacon of consistency and predictability and security for myself, hopefully I can do that for other people.
Yeah, I love that. I'm one of Abby Blakesley, my SE teacher, and who you're going to see later tonight. A phrase that really stuck with me for her is that she said, this work is sneaky powerful. Sneaky powerful. And I hear that a little bit in the consistency. It's somebody watching you go to the gym for 30 minutes and not breaking a stretch, or whatever your equivalent is now, somebody watching you might not notice how powerful that is.
Yeah.
But that is what these are the deeper changes. These are the deeper things. So I think that's a great closing thought to share.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on, Alex. It's been
Matthew, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks. Yeah, same. Looking forward to more.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.